Right. Well, welcome to Beyond Scrubs, Mickey. Thanks for joining
Thank
us
you.
today. Do you mind kind of introducing yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I'm Mickey. I have had a pretty non-linear path to medicine. I started off not even thinking that I would be in the medical field. I grew up playing the piano and um, was a music major in college, and then after a big life event, family life event, I ended up adding on a nurse, ultimately, coming to medical school. And I'm now a fourth year medical student at Tufts. And I just matched in the military match for anesthesia. So I'll be an Air Force anesthesia resident starting this summer.
Well, thank you for your service, of course. That's amazing. Talk to me about a little bit. You said that you took an untraditional route into medicine, which, being a piano player, right? And kind of going the music route and then doing nursing first. So talk to me about, do you feel as though that was
Yeah.
what are the pros and cons of kind of doing non-traditional route?
Yeah. I think I think the nice thing about the way that I did it is that, you know, like I was figuring out each step of the way as I arrived, right? When I was a music major, I had no idea that I was going to be a medical student. Even when I first started working as a nurse, I didn't really know that I was going to go into medicine as a physician. And so it's been really nice to kind of figure these things out along the way because I think a lot of my colleagues they knew they wanted to be a doctor since they were like 5 years old, and that's amazing. But I think there's also something special about kind of figuring things out as you go in life and just kind of looking back and being like, whoa, I never thought I would be here. So that's been kind of special. As far as pros go, I think that's definitely one of them.
Sure.
Um, I think I have a very unique perspective too, just because I did work in healthcare and I got to see kind of how the hospital works
Sure.
uh, as an integral part of the team, like as a different team member. And I also don't think that many medical students have that perspective coming into medical school. And then the way the hospital runs, I mean, it's like a whole other beast, you don't understand it until you're there and that you're working with these people every day. So it's nice to have had that experience and um, know how to work with many different types of personalities. And I think it can be difficult and it can be also like a very special thing, just like I'm sure working with as a team member in any setting. Um, I think the cons, like I definitely I think I've tried to be really intentional about you know, my role within the medical field and just
Sure.
you know, trying to do as much good as I can. But I think you see so many things that could be better or so many flaws within the system. So I think I really get caught up on oh, the system is so broken and it really brings you down. So the perspective is great and amazing and I think it's going to serve me well in my career, but at the same time it's like sometimes you get into these loops of looking at all the bad things and you
Sure.
know yeah, I think the ultimate challenge is just to see the good and try to make a small difference where you can, and I think I'm really trying hard to do that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. Definitely for sure. Kind of my friends that are nurses and stuff like that, right? When you have that nurse's perspective and kind of knowing the system, being on the front line of, delivering meds, taking care of patients, on the hour, every hour, sometimes even multiple patients at the same time, right? And so definitely for sure being
Yeah.
so close to that care, you're going to get that perspective of more of the system, right, per se, right? Kind of what's wrong with the system, right? On a you know healthcare one-on-one basis, kind of being so close to your patient. And then now you have a perspective being, you're about to be a physician and a resident, which, you then get another piece of the pie of the system. And then you start kind of
Yeah.
thinking about, perpetually what's wrong with our healthcare system. So definitely for
Yeah.
sure understanding, right? Our healthcare system is not perfect by any means, right? Far from it. And of course, we're all trying to do one thing at a time and trying to make some kind of impact. Of course, we're just one person, but I think that, trying our best to improve it little by little is better than doing nothing, of course.
Mhm. Mhm.
For sure.
Absolutely.
So do you feel as though your piano background and your music background helped you at all, kind of on a perspective of, is it a stress reliever? When's the last time you played piano?
Um, so I've actually played the piano more as a medical student than I did after I graduated, like, with my bachelor's degree, and I think part of that is because, like a piano having owning a piano is, like, a big deal, like, not many people own their own pianos, like, even a keyboard, right? It's, like, pretty expensive, so,
Yeah.
after I got into medical school, I treated myself and bought myself, like, a Yamaha Clavinova, which was, like, what, a couple $1,000s,
Hmm.
and so because I have that now, I've been able to play, and, actually this Christmas, I played, the piano for a Christmas concert in
Oh,
the North
awesome.
End in Boston, which is like Little Italy, basically. So we played a Christmas concert with a Catholic church, so that was
Oh,
really
awesome.
nice. Um, I think that it like uses a different part of my brain, so it's really nice to be able to do that. And like, when you commit to a Christmas concert or some type of performance, there's like a little bit of stress involved because there's like a deadline and you have to learn the music. But I think I've never regretted taking part in those types of things, even if
Sure.
it requires some prep time. Um, and like I still sit in front of my piano every once in a while and like just kind of goof around and like play stuff.
Sure.
But
So
yeah.
talking about kind of the stress, like you're talking about kind of preparing for a recital and things like that, do you feel as
Yeah.
though that kind of prepared you for the stressors in medical school, since, you played piano kind of all your life and probably played
Yeah.
competitively, is what I assume?
Yeah. Yeah, I did play competitively. I think that it taught me that you can't do anything last minute. Like playing the piano and like learning repertoire, especially some of the more difficult stuff as you like progress, you can't learn that overnight. You have to like learn it, your fingers have to learn it like it's like a muscle memory thing. And then you have to memorize the music, so you can't even look at the music. And so it takes months, right, to prepare for a competition. So if you're not practicing daily, like you're not going to be ready. If you try to cram it all into a month or even a week or whatever, like it's not going to be great for you. So I think I've definitely taken that over into medicine as well. Like, you know, you're not going to be able to, you can cram for a test, I guess. Like that's something nice about medicine. But like in order to really know something, you have to, you know, spend some time every day, give yourself a lot of time. Uh, like you have to, what's the word? Like spaced repetition. Like
Yeah,
you have to
space.
learn it again and again, right? It's not going to stick if you don't refresh your memory
So,
often.
so
So
you're
I think
telling me
those are all
you
things.
know you don't just sit there and see it once and you're good, or how many times do you think you
Yeah,
have
I
to see it?
mean, there are still things that I'm gonna have to learn again because I already forgot
Yeah,
it.
for sure. For sure. I think
Yeah,
that's the key important part. Like you said, space repetition, learning things
yeah,
multiple times, right? For our viewers to know, right? In medicine, right, everyone thinks that everyone has photographic memory. We read one thing and we understand it. Definitely not the case, as we all
nope,
know. It takes multiple repetitions, could be 7 to 10 to 12 times for material that we see, because there's just so much of it. Um,
yeah.
for sure. So walk me through kind of, let's say you have an exam within a week, how many hours are you studying a day? Are
Mhm.
have time to take care of yourself, as in eating right, getting enough sleep, working out? Do you have any time for that? Same thing, kind of, how are you balancing everything, and how many hours are you studying a week before a test?
Are you talking about like preclinical or clinical?
Talk,
Big
talk.
difference there.
Yeah,
Big
for
difference.
sure, for sure. Talk to me about preclinical, and let kind of everyone know what you mean by preclinical, and of
Yeah,
course, the clinical aspect of things.
sure. So preclinical, so basically like it's the classroom work that happens before you start your rotations and a lot of what you're learning is like, well, at least at my school, we started with
Sure.
like the basic sciences. So like cell bio, microbio, biochem, before moving into the system. So then you go into like cardiac and then GI and so on and so forth. And that was all classroom work. We didn't spend any time in the clinical setting, so like not in the hospital or uh, office or anything like that. Um, and then after we took step one, we started our rotations. And during that time, we were full time at the hospital, but then we also had an exam at the end of each rotation.
Yeah,
So,
very very similar. I think most medical schools do a very similar kind of ordeal. It's usually either
mhm,
1 to 2 years preclinical to in theory get you ready for quote unquote clinical rotations, meaning you're seeing
yeah,
patients, you're learning from residents or attending. So yeah, for sure.
yeah. And I think a lot of schools are moving toward a shorter preclinical curriculum. So, like, for example, I think my preclinical curriculum was like 3 semesters, whereas traditionally it was 4 semesters. So,
Yeah,
yeah. Um, yeah, so I will admit that I was not the most effective studier during the preclinical time period. I think it also stemmed from me not being a science major. So like I never took biochem before I started med school. I've seen some things. Yeah, I took biology. I took bio 1 and bio 2. So like some of those concepts were familiar to me, but it was still like very difficult and not intuitive. And so I think I really struggled with that. And I felt like no matter how much I studied, all the material felt very foreign to me. And I always felt like I was going to fail, even though I studied a lot. And like
yeah,
it ended up working out. It was totally fine. But it just, that feeling of like not feeling like I know it well enough was
sure.
just a constant during my preclinical years. And so I think the week before a test, this is like really, really unhealthy. Like, do not recommend. I would wake up whenever I woke up. Like, our classes were not required to attend, so I like didn't attend my classes in person. Actually, we were in COVID, so like everything was on Zoom anyways. So that was
Sure.
that, and then I would watch like the pre-recorded lectures on like 1.5 times speed or something. But the week before, I think by then the lectures had slowed down, so it was just like reviewing material. I would wake up, drink some coffee, sit in front of my desk, and just start reviewing my PowerPoints. And I would just do that until I went to bed. And I didn't go outside for the whole week. Like, I literally remember one week I did not see the sun at all.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
for
just,
sure.
like, I wore my pajamas the whole day. I would
Yeah,
just drink coffee and like eat whatever I had in the fridge, and I would study from the time I woke up until the time I went to bed, and repeated until like Friday morning, which is when I usually took the test. And I had so much anxiety the night before some of these like basic science exams. I probably went to bed at like 3 in the morning. Just I wasn't even studying at that point. I just couldn't sleep. And then I would wake up at like 7, review some notes some more, and then go take the test and then
yeah,
crash after. So that was the vibe. Not
yeah.
very healthy.
Yeah, I would say that, I would say that you're not alone, right? I've had multiple of my classmates. I've done it a couple times too. We're all kind of guilty of it.
Yeah.
But what people don't understand is like, the magnitude of how much information are on these tests, these
It was a
preclinical tests.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, compared to kind of undergrad. And so I was just curious a long time ago,
Mhm.
a couple years ago. So I looked,
Mhm.
because as I've tutored for a long time for step one and step two, but I
Yeah.
was curious on how much information was on one of these tests. And so I looked at an undergrad course and it was 1 semester in microbiome.
Mhm.
You want to guess how fast, like in that semester, how many days it took us to cover their material in 6 months?
Uh, so like one semester's worth of information, like how long in med school?
Yes.
Uh, I don't know, like a week.
No, it was 3 days. So we covered 3 days.
Really?
Yeah, we covered all their whole semester of 6 months within 3 days.
Yeah.
And so just on the magnitude of kind of, how everyone can understand is like,
Yeah.
some of these tests, right? We are studying for 3 or 4 weeks, meaning that, the magnitudes and the amount of volume of taking this test, right? And so, yeah,
Mhm.
you might think like, oh, a week is plenty of time to study for these tests, right? But in
Yeah.
actuality, when we say cramming, we mean, oh, wait, we waited till the last minute, which is 1 week before, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And so definitely we've all been there. And
Yeah.
the magnitude of kind of when, when you're saying you wake up and go to sleep and study, right? You're talking, 8, 9, 10 hours plus, right? And I think that, a lot of people have this misconception that we study a couple hours, 2, 3
Yeah.
hours, call it a day,
Yeah.
and then just do well in the test. No, no, no. It takes like
Hmm.
hours. And like you said, there are some times in my career where I never saw the sun for weeks at a time, right? Just so unhealthy.
Yeah,
So
totally.
for sure, for
And this
sure.
is like not even cramming, right? It's like I was trying to keep up with the material throughout the whole
Yeah.
block, and I was still not seeing the sun the week before an exam. Like,
Yeah.
I wasn't just like putting everything off. Like, it's a lot. It's really a
No,
lot.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And it's just funny how when I speak to people that are not in medicine, right? Their misconception of like what I do is just like, oh yeah, Daniel probably studies a couple hours a day, and he like has a great life and like all this stuff. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, that's not really how this goes, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I think your experience is not unique in a sense that we all have been through this, right? Where you're
Yeah.
just studying so much just to stay not even like ahead or on top. You're barely behind the meter, right? Of like, oh,
Yeah.
I barely know enough to be like where I need to be, right? And so definitely for sure, your first 2 years are you're trying to figure that out and
Yeah.
figure out what's most efficient and exactly how to study and things like that. So for sure.
Hmm.
But talk to me
Yep.
about kind of clinicals, which is a different
Yeah.
beast in itself.
Yes. Yeah. Different beast. But I will say, like, I think the biggest beast was step one.
Yeah,
And
let's talk
so,
about step one. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Step one, I think,
So,
is huge.
I mean, like, can't talk about clinical years without talking about step one. So, like, I think I was studying pretty inefficiently, and I didn't realize that until I started studying for step one. And like, I assumed that like I would remember a lot of the things that I had learned already, and that it would be like pretty smooth sailing, which it wasn't for me. And like, I think that everyone is in a different place when they arrive at step one dedicated, right? But for me, it was like, oh, like there's still some work that I need to do. And so I think during those 8 weeks is when I really like reevaluated my studying habits and realized that it was not very efficient. Because until then I was like making it work, I was like getting
Sure.
the average, sometimes even a little higher. I was like, oh, I'm doing fine. But then step one is like everything that you've learned in the preclinical years, and you have to know it all at once. So yeah, I had to reevaluate. And then actually, like, you helped me a lot during that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I think I took a lot of those things moving forward um, into my studying, and that really did help me. And I feel like my clinical years were a lot less stressful in that regard, like as far as test taking, and I felt a lot more confident going into test day. And I think, that started as like at the beginning of the rotation, like, divided up the number of UWorld questions by the number of days that I had and like would do them daily. And if I didn't understand a concept, like I would review that concept. And you're also seeing patients in real life, and you're able to take those experiences into your exam as well. So like things stick better maybe when you've actually experienced them yourself. Um, and then, our school also has a formal didactic curriculum for each rotation. So, like, in addition to being in the clinical space, like once a week or so, you have a few hours of lecture that you're expected to attend. And, I thought those lectures were actually a lot more interactive than the
Yeah.
lectures that I had during my preclinical years. So, I think that helped too.
Sure, for sure. And
Yeah.
talking about preclinical versus, clinical years, right? In medical education. Um, you know, who was teaching your preclinical years, right? Was it MDs or PhDs mainly?
I think for the basic science blocks, definitely PhDs. As we moved into the systems, it was MDs. I would say it was a mix.
Yeah.
MDs, some PhDs sometimes, but more clinically focused. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's kind of very similar in most medical schools, I would say, is that, these basic science courses and stuff like that, they're mainly taught by PhDs. And I think that makes it a little bit more difficult to see kind of, when we're getting tested on these basic science things, they are always related in a clinical setting on your step one. But when you're getting
Mm-hmm.
taught by a PhD, they're not really kind of connecting those dots for you. They give you kind of all these factoids and these things to memorize, but they don't have much insight on, how is it going to show up on step one, right?
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
why, I always felt that it was a little bit difficult. To take kind of what you learned on a basic science from a PhD, because sometimes it's just so much basic science that you start getting geared off towards what's actually applicable to step one. But definitely for sure, as you said, usually when you start transitioning to physicians, right, that are teaching,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they'll try to teach you in a way where it's connected to a test that they actually took, right? And so it makes it a little bit easier for sure.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Gotcha. So, question here for you, kind of a broader sense here. From your experience in medical school, what are a couple favorite things that, out of your 4 years that you're like,
Mm-hmm.
man, that, those are my three or a couple favorite things for medical school.
Like medical school related things.
Yeah, medical school related. It could be adjunct. It doesn't have to be just the material. It can
Huh.
be, socially,
Yeah.
what are kind of things?
Ooh, interesting question. Okay. So because we started med school in 2020, I feel
Yeah,
like I didn't get to know my classmates really well during the preclinical years. Like we were all kind of just separated within
yeah,
the city of Boston. We had our little pockets of friends, but we didn't really stray from that. So I really enjoyed during third year and even into the beginning of fourth year, like meeting my classmates for the first time, which
yeah,
sounds so sad, really, but like that's just how it was for us. And like realizing that my classmates are like amazing people and like I really had a great clinical experience. Like it was hard, but I felt like my classmates and I worked collaboratively all the time and some of my best friends in medical school now are actually people that I met during third year.
awesome.
So
Yeah.
that was really special and hopefully like we keep in touch like even after medical school. I think
And if
my
it's
favorite
okay, yeah,
yeah.
that's okay
Yeah,
if you
what?
think that that's the only thing that you could think of.
Yeah.
But
Um okay, I'll tell you my favorite rotation, like
sure,
out of my core rotations in third
yeah,
year. And I really liked OB, which I think is a very unpopular opinion. And it's funny because I'm not going into OB because I knew that I wasn't going to go into OB. Like, I just knew that I wasn't going into OB, but I still liked it. And I think it was because it's this like amazing combination of like surgery and then compassionate care that
yeah,
is required in the obstetric setting. And I was at an amazing site. I was at Newton Wellesley, right outside of like it's in the greater Boston area. It's a community hospital. But I thought that was like just like I got to work with the most amazing people that were so compassionate, so caring, so patient, but also got to be in the OR and
yeah,
they
for
let me
sure.
do a lot of stuff. So it was awesome. A good time.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely longer hours though. Yeah, for your OB rotation.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think there are some locations that have longer hours. We were at a community hospital, so they were just like, yeah, go home
Oh, okay,
sometimes.
gotcha.
But yes, I mean, I think OB traditionally has some pretty brutal hours and yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's one of the things I remember on my OB rotation is that, ironically, some of the OBs said that I would make a good OB, but I was like, I don't know how you see that. But regardless of the fact, right? Yeah, definitely long hours. They always say you can never predict when a baby's born, right? So for sure. But talk to me a little about kind of, with probably tons of medical students and also residents, it affected me too across the nation during, your COVID times, right? Do you feel as though, that affected your education? What do you think kind of, affected it with the whole COVID being isolated? Like you said, you're doing lectures online. Tell me kind of your
hmm
perspective on that.
To be completely honest, like I think that there was a pretty low attendance rate for lectures anyways. And I don't know if that's the case for like a lot of medical schools across the US, but I think students were starting to find that, oh, it's easier if I just like listen to this at my own pace or like at a time where I'm more, you know, awake, or maybe I'm like a night owl. Some not everyone is like a morning person. So I think medical students are like self-directed learners, and I think we've had to be that way in order to do really well in taking our prerequisites and stuff like that. So I don't think it really affected my preclinical education.
Hmm.
And then by the time I started my rotations, it was like spring of 2022. So things were changing. We were in a clinical setting full time. I think we were still wearing masks up here in Massachusetts for the whole year, I think.
Hmm.
I don't quite remember, but I mean, there were some like, like, oh, if you get COVID, you're gonna have to stay home for like 5 days or something like that. The policies were always changing, but I don't think it affected my education. I think it did affect my um ability to like make strong connections with
Sure,
friends.
sure.
And it's kind of sad because like I look back on these 4 years and I'm like, oh, like, I spent a lot of time alone. But then, how different would that have been had it not been COVID? I mean, I still would have had to study a lot, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. I mean, no, for sure. I mean, I didn't obviously go through the COVID era of medical school, right? So,
Yeah,
just kind of compare and contrast, right? So, my education was practically almost similar to yours, COVID or not, right? I
yeah,
hardly went to class, right? Our lectures were all, recorded. Of course, we had some mandatory things that we had to go to,
right,
but it was
right.
very few and far between, right? During my
Mm-hmm,
preclinical years. And like you were saying, sometimes when you are just barely trying to stay up above water, right? Of course, I had some weekends where I went out with my friends or whatnot, right? But
mm-hmm,
if you're talking
mm-hmm.
about tons and tons of time to do stuff, I mean, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, majority of the time I'm home studying anyway, so the education is probably not that different.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, self-directed learning is a great way to describe it. I mean, the majority of us are, and so it's yeah, the lecture is okay, it's great, but if you were to tell us, hey, we need you to learn X, Y, and Z, right? Whether there's a lecture or not, the majority of us,
mm-hmm,
I would say, would be able to find that information somewhere and learn it by ourselves, right? It's
yeah,
just something
yeah,
that we've had to do kind of to get into medicine, anyways, right? And so, for sure, I think that on a preclinical standpoint, I don't think it changes much. Like you
yeah,
said, maybe the social aspect a little bit, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
definitely for sure during residency, it kind of affected me during that year.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, all our cases during COVID practically shut down. I'm an ENT resident, so at the
Mm,
time, we do majority of our cases are elective cases, meaning that we
mm-hmm,
do it on
mm-hmm,
an outpatient basis. You schedule it right, all this stuff that is not urgent or emergent. The only things that were urgent or emergent are cancer cases, but everything
mm-hmm,
else, going to ear cases, tonsils, tubes,
mm-hmm,
sinus stuff, right? All that stuff was practically canceled. So for that whole year, we didn't have too many elective cases. It was just a bunch of cancer cases.
mm-hmm,
So it affected me in that standpoint in a year, and probably same across the nation for surgical, residents in general. But for
mm-hmm.
sure, I mean, preclinicals. I mean, I hardly showed up also, so don't feel bad.
Was that your second year of residency? 2020?
I think it was my second year. Yeah, it was my second year. So that was when you're starting to learn how to do, for us at least.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We started early first year, but you're trying to master your tonsils, your tubes, things like that. But I didn't really get to do a lot of that. So.
Do you feel like that affected your residency training overall, or do you feel like you caught up eventually?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So, residency is freaking long. Okay, I'll just tell you
Yeah.
that now, right? 5 years, right? And so, definitely for sure, I don't feel like I lost anything
Mm-hmm.
that year, to be honest,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you just see so many patients, you do so many surgeries. So,
Mm-hmm.
even without that year, I logged over like 1,500 surgeries, right? That I did, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
definitely for sure, it didn't affect much. We
Yeah.
work such long hours and see so many patients that, ironically speaking, it just kind of proves like maybe I could have done a 4-year program instead of 5, right? And so it's kind of one of those things, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, that's good. That's good.
for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so after your experience, you're wrapping up, it's your fourth year, right? Talk to me about a couple things that you didn't like so much in medical school that maybe, you wish someone had warned you about.
I think they've done a pretty good job of like getting rid of, I don't even know like what to call these assignments, like just like BS assignments, like
Sure.
things that like fill up your time but aren't really meaningful in any way.
Busy
Like
work?
like busy work, yeah, like writing a paper or like writing filling out a worksheet or something, like I don't know, those types of assignments that just like take up a lot of your time. I think they've done away with most of that. But I feel like every time they tried to make us do something like that, I felt like I resented that just because, I have developed my own way of studying that has worked
Sure.
for me. And then when the faculty try to add these types of assignments, I'm just like, why? Like,
Yeah,
why are you
for
making
sure.
us do this? And I understand that, like, obviously we have to be evaluated in some ways, and maybe some faculty choose to evaluate us by making us do homework or something. But, I just think it's kind of silly. And it takes time away from the faculty that have to grade these assignments, right? So it's just like
Yeah.
kind of stupid, I think. But that's just my personal opinion. And gosh, I think there's this like unspoken expectation to do research in medical school, and I felt it from day one. I don't know
Yeah.
why. It's like they kept bringing it up, like, oh, summer research between your first and second year, and they kept saying like this is not required at all, but it might be helpful to you. So like, what does that mean? I think it's kind of silly because there's definitely like, especially if you go into a surgical specialty, a surgical subspecialty, there's this like, that's kind of like this unspoken requirement, right? Like if
Yeah.
you try to apply into ENT without any research, they're gonna like laugh at you and like not
Yeah.
give you an interview.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
so I wish they had been a little bit more transparent about that. Like, hey, if you're interested in these specialties, it's very important that you start research on day one of medical school, because no one ever told us that. And I think you just kind of had to figure it out as you go. And now a lot of my classmates that started off in the class of 2024 are in the middle of their research year because they didn't have enough research to apply to the specialty that they wanted to apply into. So it's like, you know, I think definitely a part of that is like you need to figure it out yourself and like network and like hear from people that are in the field, but I wish that they had also been more transparent because I felt a lot of pressure to do research and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And even until like the last minute, I was like, do I want to apply into family medicine or anesthesia, which are like completely different specialties, both of which don't require research. But like what if I had been like, oh my God, I love plastic surgery at the
Yeah.
end of my third year, like then I would have had to take a gap year. So
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. For sure. I
yeah.
mean, I think what you bring up is, super important. The fact that, it's kind of one of those things in medicine where, I feel as though faculty or medical schools, they
Mhm.
also are under the impression that we're self learners, right? Which is,
Mhm.
we all are self learners in a sense, right? Um, but there's something in medicine where it's like there are some parts of medicine where knowledge is kind of, I don't know how to say this, is a little bit hidden, or you have to go find out yourself, which I
Mhm.
never understood, like you said, right? You know, Same thing for me, right? It's kind of like you're trying to figure out like like I didn't even know about ENT until, way later in my first year. Didn't even know it existed as a specialty, right? So I could
Mhm.
only imagine if I figured out, oh, my third year of medical school that I want to do ENT, right? You're pretty much screwed, right? It's like, oh yeah, by the way, you need research. Oh, by the way, you need to be shadowing these guys. But
Mhm.
yeah, these subspecialties or these competitive specialties, they're less known of kind of what are the requirements and whatnot. But medical schools don't do a very good job of kind of putting that up front, kind of on day one. Not sure if it's just because they assume that, oh, they'll find out themselves, which I think is kind of the
Mhm.
probably perception, or
Mhm.
oh,
Mhm.
these are so small of a specialty, people that actually do want to do it, they'll actually know about it or something. I don't know, but
Right.
yeah,
Right.
sure, for sure. And I think that it would be nice if we got the heads up at the beginning, and even like
Mhm.
you said, I think it's very common that people find out later in their medical school careers of what truly do they want to do, right?
Yeah,
Not everyone
yeah.
is lucky enough to be like, oh, this is it, right? My first year of
Mhm.
medical school, right? And
Yeah,
so yeah, the transparency of kind of what each specialty is still very, you only know really about the big six that you do rotations on, right? And so
right,
um,
right, right.
the rest of it is kind of like, well, find out yourself, which is kind of like you said, is a little bit annoying, right? In a sense, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
for sure.
But then also, like, I've heard of people, and this is definitely like the exception and not the rule, but people that apply into, so there's one person that I heard about that applied into pediatrics and then realized that they actually wanted to do dermatology. And so somehow they got connected with the derm department and like did some research and networked and reapplied in the match and like ultimately got a derm spot. So like there are people that like figure this out later and still
Sure.
are successful. Like it's
Yep.
not like you have to have it figured out in med school. It's just easier, I think, to have
Yeah,
it all
for
figured
sure.
out in med school.
For sure.
Yeah.
There's always, I'm glad you brought that up because there's always exceptions to these rules, right?
Yeah.
We talk about traditional ways of doing things and non-traditional ways, right? And of course, I think that, it's been kind of, whether it's true or not, we don't know, right? But it's been pounded in our heads, right? That, going a non-traditional route like, oh yeah, matching into somewhere and then reapplying, right, is probably, I would say statistically, right, a lot harder to probably match, right? And so,
Mhm.
of course, we
Mhm.
never hear about those routes. But yeah, I know a couple of my friends, close friends, that did something very similar, right? Where they wanted to do something, they didn't match, right? And then a random spot opened up and ended up matching into neurosurgery, right? And so definitely
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
these alternative routes, but I would say I probably wouldn't recommend it. That sounds
True.
extraordinary,
Yeah, yeah.
you
You're
know.
right. You're right.
So for
Definitely
sure,
not a recommendation.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, so talk to me about routine wise. Uh,
Mhm.
has your routine evolved throughout your 4 years of medical school? Kind of, can you talk me through kind of how your routine originally was and kind of how it
Yeah.
kind of slowly changed and how are you balancing, I mean, currently, right, you just had a newborn kid, right, which is
Yeah.
congratulations, but how
Thanks.
are you balancing that as your routine kind of is shifting, right?
Yeah. So I mean, the nice thing about your preclinical years, again, is that you don't have many things that you're required to attend. Like maybe anatomy lab was the only thing. And so I felt like I could structure my day however I wanted to. And during those years, I don't know why I was just like going to sleep really late and waking up pretty late. So
Hmm.
that was just like what ended up happening for me and just accepted that that's what my body was doing. So that's how I was and that's how I was studying too. Um, when you start your rotations, you're expected to be places at certain times. So I think you really have to adjust to that. And, like surgery is like the infamous one where you're like, showing up at 5 in the morning. So you're waking up at like 4, and
Hmm.
then you're leaving pretty late too, depending on the day. So, you know, you're going to bed early or you're trying to,
Yeah.
and you still have to fit in the studying somewhere. Um, so it just really depended on the rotation. Like, I think, um, on the rotations where you were primarily working during the day, like maybe 7 or 8 a.m. till like 5 p.m. ish, it was nice because, I would like wake up and get ready, go to work. Hopefully it was light outside and then,
Hmm.
would come home and had some time to do things like cook dinner or maybe work out. I was really bad about working out during third year.
Yeah.
I think some people did better in that realm. I was not one of them. Um, so you just have to like squeeze in the things that are important to you, and there is a way to do it. You just have to be intentional.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, for me, I think like I started intermittent fasting during third year, which was like super convenient because I just did stopped eating breakfast and
Yeah.
that's
No,
like one meal that you didn't have to worry about, which is nice.
yeah.
And then I would just like eat a bigger lunch and bigger dinner and it just like worked out for me.
Yeah.
Um
Well, I'm gonna have to say that when you start residency, don't worry.
yeah.
You don't even have to call it intermittent fasting. You just call it the resident diet. You just have like no time. So everyone's like, oh, what
Yeah.
kind of diet you on? You're on the resident diet, right? Like you wake up,
Yeah.
right? You go to work, and you're like, crap, right? You don't have time to eat, and so it's yeah, for sure. No,
Yeah.
It's a good segue for sure if you're already starting that. I mean, the mornings are really hectic during residency, as you'll eventually find out, and so it'll transition well.
Yeah, awesome. Glad to hear it. So like the last 4 months, well, 3 months. Okay, I was very lucky. I got a long quote unquote maternity leave. So I haven't really been doing anything at all. Like I say that, but like I've actually been really busy. It's like this weird feeling of like feeling like I haven't been doing anything, but you're like keeping a baby alive, which is like very time consuming. You
Yeah,
just
yeah,
can't do like all the normal things that you're used to doing because
yeah.
you're
I can
keeping the
imagine.
baby alive. And so I start my internal medicine sub-I tomorrow morning.
Okay.
So that should be really interesting. So maybe we should do another follow-up podcast to talk about how that's going.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely
Yeah.
balancing between, especially,
Yeah.
you moving forward too is going to be, I feel as though throughout our careers, right, starting from medical school, and then as you'll start to realize in residency, our routines are for the most part, a revolving door of kind of figuring out at what point in time what's most efficient. And like you said, I think key
Yeah.
thing, I think, people have said also, medical students, and someone I, did a podcast the other day with, is that, being intentional with your time is just so important. And that's one of the key things that, the more efficient you can be with your time, just the more you're able to
Yeah.
fit in things that are important to you. Of course, family, right? Work is always there, but your health and things like
Yeah.
that. So for sure, I can only imagine, how, the routine that you're going to have to create, right, to, be a great mom and, do well in residency and keep up with your health. So that's a
Yeah.
lot for sure.
Yeah. And I think also like thinking about just things that helped me to succeed during third year and in the beginning of fourth year, like um disclaimer, like I am married and my husband has been like so amazing for the past 2 years that we've been living together here in Boston. Like, he cooks a lot of the dinners and like lately has been like going grocery shopping because I'm like taking care of the baby. And so I
Yeah.
think it's important to acknowledge like all the people in your like village that are helping you to succeed too. It's not like a one man show ever. Like I don't think anyone is
Mhm.
doing it by themselves. So
Yeah.
some
No,
people
for
have more support and some people have less support. But
For
yeah.
sure, for sure, and I think that's super key that you mentioned is like, it is usually not a one man band. I'll tell you this now, and it's obviously a one man band when you're dealing with studying. That's for dang sure, right?
Right, right. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
all the other stuff in life, right? The dinners and emotional support, people you talk to, keeping us sane, right? I mean, it does take a village, I would say, especially the
Yeah.
emotional standpoint. Um,
Mhm.
Definitely for sure, Megan, my fiance, throughout
Yeah.
residency has been a huge part of that. But people only see you, right, struggling, but really it's kind of the components of the village that allows you to succeed for sure. And same with
Yeah.
family back home that I talk to every morning, right? Because if I
Mhm.
didn't, I'd probably go insane, right? And so, and obviously
Yeah.
friends, right? You've calling me and I've called you, a couple times in our,
Yeah.
of course. So
That's
for
true.
sure, I
That's
mean,
true.
those are super important times. And even a 20 to 30 minute conversation, that can change a lot, right, of whether or not do you want to continue doing this, right? I mean, talking about that, I've definitely had it, but how about stress? And we don't talk about enough in medicine, but stress and
Mhm.
depression, what do you kind of, what is your perspective on that? You in particular, and your classmates.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people in medicine are on antidepressants. Like, I
Sure.
think that's just the honest truth. And, like, yes, you're right. Like, not many people talk about it, but a lot of medical students, medical trainees, doctors are seeing psychiatrists. They're like taking a pill every day. And that's not a bad thing. Like, it's really good that people are recognizing that they need some extra help and that
Yeah.
they're getting it. But I think it like really opens your eyes to like how big the problem is, right?
Yeah.
Because it is a problem that
Yeah,
there are
for
so many
sure.
people that are anxious or depressed in medicine, when our whole like life mission is to like help other people. Um And yeah, I think there were definitely times during medical school that I was like feeling more anxious or more depressed. I think anxiety and depression go hand in hand too,
Yeah,
especially for like really high performers.
yeah.
Um,
Especially, like
and
you said, high performers, as in also, everyone in medical school is, type A personality, right? I mean, I feel as though there's
yeah,
just higher chance of us becoming, anxious, stressed, depressed, right? I
hmm
mean,
yeah,
um, you're high performing, you're driven, and obviously, you're always looking to your left and your right and seeing, hey, how are my
yeah,
classmates doing,
yeah,
right?
totally.
So, so for sure, I mean, kind of picking back on what you said, I mean, my close group of friends in medical school, right? A lot of them, more than 50% of them were, either seeing a psychiatrist or on an antidepressant, right? I mean, this is something that is very, very common in medical school. We just never talk about it,
hmm
right?
Yeah,
But yeah, super, super common. So
yeah. And I think, I've been thinking about this a lot. It's like when you recognize that you have depression or are experiencing depression, it's like, you can change your environment, which would be to like maybe not do med school
yeah,
because
yeah,
obviously that's the source of a lot of
yeah,
people's
for
anxiety
sure,
and depression,
for
right? And
sure.
it's like for many people, it's that's not an option because even though it's
Yep,
making them so miserable, it's like, oh, wait, now I'm like 300K in debt. Like, I'm never going to be able to pay this off if I don't continue. So then you have to continue. And it's like, okay, how can I continue doing this despite it making me feel this way? So I think
for
that's
sure.
something that you have to think about as well. And, and then obviously, like, there's medication and there's medical help. And then there are also things that are going to help you stay more resilient in your life
Yeah,
that you are responsible for on a daily basis. And those are things like the most basic things that we all talk about. And like I think that if everyone could do these things, like we would have a lot less disease in the world. But like getting enough sleep and like eating healthy and no, like not drinking so much caffeine or like, not using uh drugs to help you get through these hard times or you
yeah,
know,
for,
exercising. Like so simple, right? Like so
yeah.
simple yet so
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
I think you hit it on the nail there. I mean, these are, ironically, right? I would say that people in medicine or people outside of medicine know exactly like, the things that, you should do, right? Eat
Yeah.
well, have a good diet, sleep, exercise, right? All these things that you mentioned, right? I think majority of people in the world know that, but like you said, it's just so easy on the knowledge, but so difficult, like you said, right? And I think that's what kind of also, in a sense, adds a little bit to the stress, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you're spending all this time doing something, right? You're super stressed, you're not getting enough sleep, but you need to get enough sleep, right? And it's just like this
Yeah.
whirlwind of like, I know I should be doing something, but I'm not. And then kind of like you said, there's a financial pressure too, of course, when you go to medical school, right? I mean, me personally, I'm in debt like 300K, right? And
Mhm.
might be staggering to somebody not in medicine, but it's so common in medical, in the medical field of
Right.
the loans that we take out. But not only
Yeah.
on that, right? I mean, for me in particular, right? I had a biochem undergrad degree, right? If I'm not doing
Mhm.
medicine, what am I doing, right? Like, I mean, that degree doesn't do much, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of these things where it's like, you kind of committed yourself, right? Not only on a financial standpoint, but depending on how far in your education. Yeah, like
Mhm.
some days, like, I mean, I think I've talked to you about this, where in residency, you're like, I don't, this is probably, why did I do this, right? You're like, kind of, why you do this, right? And, you kind of reflect and say, well, you mean you've come this far, and I would say majority of the time we do like kind of what we do, right? But there are days
Mhm.
where you just are like, what the hell am I doing, right? And I think that's very, very common in medicine for sure.
Mhm.
It's just we don't talk about it enough, and I think that that kind of isolates us as medical professionals, that is just like you're thinking like, oh, I must be the only one, right? But
Mhm.
even the most successful medical students or physicians or residents, we get this, I don't, the frequency changes on how ridiculously tough you are. But I think one of the key things is that we're able to persevere, right? Kind of talk to kind of our emotional support, have that village to help us support. But that's kind of what makes us a little bit different, is that, we get the same kind of issues that regular people get that are not in medicine, the depression, the stress, right? The financial issues, etc. But one of the things that, is watered down to what's out there on social media now is that the resilience
Hmm.
of kind of what it takes on a, emotional standpoint of, to become a physician for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is your kind of talking about sleep, right? What is your optimal amount of sleep, like hours wise?
Oh my gosh, it's like so much. It's so embarrassing, but also like I'm like scared because I recognize that I need this much sleep and I'm about to start residency soon. But I
Yeah,
think my optimal amount of sleep is like 9 hours.
that's
I'm
a
like not even
lot.
I'm not even kidding. 9 hours. I can function on, 6 or 7 throughout the week, but then by the end of the week I'm like really struggling.
Yeah.
So, for example, last night I went to bed at like 10. So
Uh-huh.
we put our baby to sleep at like 9:15ish, and then I kind of stayed awake for a few more minutes just kind of like scrolling on my phone, like wasting time really, let's be honest. And I went
Yeah.
to bed
Yeah.
at 10, woke up at 3:30 and 7 a.m. to feed, and then really got out of bed at like 8:30. So that's about 9 hours total, I would say.
Yeah.
10,
Yeah.
10 to 8:30. So that's like 10 and a half hours minus some time in the middle of the night. And like starting tomorrow, I'm gonna be waking up at like 5 in the morning. So wish me luck.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, 9 hours. I mean, that's a lot of hours.
I
It's
know.
going to be very, very, very difficult to do in residency. I would say 6 or 7 is usually what you're getting normally, at least for me. Just
Mm-hmm.
due to the fact of residencies are long hours, and of course when you start in particular, right? When you start residency,
Mm-hmm.
there's still a lot of studying to do. You might have gotten
Yeah, I'm
in, right, but you
sure.
have to
Yeah.
learn all the things of what anesthesia, the drugs, right, kind of how to manage certain
Yeah.
patients, right, what to look for, right. So all
Mm-hmm.
those things are going to eat up, and of course, right, your kid and stuff like that. And so usually the first thing to go, even though we've talked about how important it is usually sleep,
Yeah. I
is
know.
usually the
That's so
first thing.
true. That's so true. Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little about, a little bit something controversial is kind of resident
Okay.
pay, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're about to, start residency.
Yeah.
There's been, a lot of talk about kind of compensation for residents, right? Should it be increased? What is
Mm-hmm.
your perspective on, resident pay as it is now? So you're talking, I think
Yeah.
most around the United States, obviously depending on, if you are more expensive cities, then your resident salary is going to be slightly slightly increased, or if you're at
Mm-hmm.
a cheaper location, slightly decreased. But I think on
Mm-hmm.
average is probably around, let's just say, 60,000 to 80,000, depending on if you're on the coast or in the
Yeah.
Midwest, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So what do you think about kind of pay?
So this is my personal opinion, hot take.
Sure.
Um, I strongly disagree with the pay scale that, like residents receive, the salary that residents receive. Yes, we don't have much experience aside from our clinical rotations in like practicing medicine, but we have been, training for most people at a minimum of 8 years in school, prior to getting to that point, and then getting paid like 60K. I mean, I know like I interviewed at some places where it was like actually less than 50K, 60K, in
Yeah.
Texas.
Yep.
And um like that's enough to live on uh modestly without like saving much or paying off your loans, right? Like
Yeah.
you can live off of that money, but you're not going to be building any type of investment, or you're not going to be paying off all your hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans. So, I think it makes it difficult to um like settle down and like do life things, invest in your retirement, or have children. Like all those things are so difficult and feel out of reach because you're not getting paid enough, and we're working many many hours, right? So
Yeah.
my personal opinion is that if they could increase resident salaries to a livable amount. Like PAs get paid about, what would you say, like 90 to 110K,
Yeah, 90
right?
to 110K, and
Yeah, that's like reasonable.
and they're working less hours too, right? I mean,
And
you're
they're
talking.
working less hours, yeah.
Yep.
And
And
I do think that like if we got paid about that much, and then they scaled back our hours a little bit, like I would gladly do residency for 10 years. Like if I got paid 100K and they said you're working 40 hours a week, and like obviously we're still expected to take call because I think that's an important part of the learning experience. Um, but you get, 3 months of maternity leave, and you get like paid time off every year, like an adequate amount to where
yeah,
you feel like you can, you know,
so
not
so
feel
you
burnt out maybe.
yeah, yeah, so you're practically saying make residency like a real job anywhere else. I mean, that's what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then make it a little bit longer. And I think we can still produce like very excellent physicians
Yeah,
if
for
we do
sure.
that.
For sure. That's definitely,
Yeah.
one way to view it. Of course, prolonging it and making it
Yeah.
regular hours. I think it would be definitely mentally, right, more healthy, right, for sure.
Mhm.
But just so kind of, people know what it is now, right? You're talking about 50 or 60K a year, right?
Mhm.
You're talking about, majority of times about 80 hours a week, right? That's
Mhm.
usually kind of what it is. If you do the math on that, right, being a resident is about, it's about $10 to $11 an hour. I think you get paid better at a grocery shop or even some fast food places like Chick-fil-A and
Yeah.
stuff are paying more than $10 to $11 an hour, right? And so yeah, for sure, it's kind of a big kind of contention now in residency pay is that there's some places that are unionizing and things like that, but definitely for sure it's kind of, especially when you start out and as
Mhm.
an intern or a second year, right, in residency, you kind of like, well, you kind of supporting the fact that it's like, oh, I don't know enough, so maybe this is okay. But then as you
Mhm.
start actually becoming, more and more as a physician, and more and more, and you start to realize that you're doing almost the same, well, practically the same exact thing as an attending, but you're
Mhm.
practically not getting paid at all, right? Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of the same sentiment, right? I mean, maybe for the first half, maybe it's adequate, right? Because you're not really
Mhm.
contributing much, you're still learning, but
Mhm.
definitely the midpoint to the second half of your residency, you are doing the majority of things, right?
Mhm.
All the paperwork, taking care of all the patients, right? Coming up with all the, taking all the call, right? But you
Yeah.
are getting paid significantly less than not only the physician, right, that is your attending, but also, like you said, the PAs, right? There are,
Mhm.
nurses that make more, right? Let's be real, right?
Yeah.
There's nurses that make more than you, right?
Mhm.
Especially
Actually,
traveling.
I think most nurses make more than a resident.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and especially travel nurses, right? Even traveling like scrub
Mhm.
techs and stuff, they're making up to close to six figures, right? And so, not to say that going back to again, right? Not to say that residents are better than X, Y, Z. I just believe that on a compensation standpoint and how hard we work as residents, I
Mhm.
think that like you said, I mean things are so expensive now. Like, I mean, you're barely kind of making it by and scrapping by, and this is not even talking about paying back your loans, raising a family, having a kid, all these things that you know. If we were not in this field, they'd be like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense, right? Like, you don't have enough to
Yeah.
support your family, then probably needs to either one, find another job, right, to
Mhm.
be able
Mhm.
to deal with those finances, or you get a raise. But obviously, in residency, we have almost no power when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
And then it's important to remember too, and this isn't the case with all programs, like maybe your program is pretty small, but if you are a part, like a resident in like a big internal medicine program, like you're running the hospital. Like without residents, the hospital would not function. And I think it's important to remember that yes, like residents are still learning, but we provide a lot of value to the hospital too.
for sure, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
even though my department's small, I could say that if the residents didn't take call, my attendings would like probably be burnt out and not want to, they would quit their job and be like, why would I want to take primary call, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. These are things that we don't really talk about, right? But yeah, for sure, the hospital really wouldn't run without residents if it was created that way, right? Meaning that if it's an academic institution that is they literally have how the workload is. And when they try to hire attendings, they go, oh, we have residents, right? That means that a lot of the burden that you don't want to do is done by residents,
Yeah.
right? We don't talk
Yeah.
about that, but that's really what it means, right? It's
Hmm.
one of the things that when hospitals are hiring out for attendings, they make that one of the forefronts of something that is appealing to attendings, right? Because
That's so
that means,
interesting.
yeah, for
I
sure.
didn't know that actually. That's
Yeah,
crazy
yeah,
that they
that's
put
one.
that as one of their like things that they're advertising. Like, hey, the residents are gonna do all your work for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an implied thing, right? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
so your attendings take call, right, when they have residents, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when I'm on call with my attending, right, I'm seeing every patient, I'm dealing with all acute issues, I'm coming up with all plans, and then I don't bother them, right, until they wake up, and then I give them like, oh yeah, I saw like 8 patients in the middle of the night. This is kind of what happened. They're like, thumbs up. Literally text me a thumbs up, right? That's
Wow.
literally how it is, right? And so,
Yeah.
good and bad thing, right? Good in the fact that that means that yeah, I'm ready to be done with residency, which is always good.
Mhm.
But like I
Mhm.
said, going back to the pay, right? I mean, you're doing exactly what an attending would do. You're taking their call, right? And I think
Mhm.
per call, depending on where you are for ENT, you're getting 1,000 or 2,000 a 24-hour shift, right? Do I see
Mhm.
any of
Mhm.
that? Definitely not, right? So,
Yeah.
definitely for sure, pay is one of those controversial things. And of course, the older attendings will be like, well, I got paid even less than that, right? And so it's kind of like this thing
Yeah.
where it's like, well,
Yeah.
like, medicine is like that, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
People are always going to be like, well, in my time, right, like, you guys are complaining, but I didn't get paid, right? And so definitely for sure it's an ever changing topic that is a little bit controversial, of course.
Totally. And then I think it's also important to remember that like we're arguing about like resident pay, but like you are paid very well
Yeah,
once you
for
become
sure.
an attending, and you can't ignore that. Like you
For
can't
sure.
ignore that fact. So
For sure.
also important to consider as part of the argument. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Definitely for sure. There's always two sides of the coin, of course. If you add in, potential earnings and, not even you're talking about the intangible parts of, being a physician and training and taking care of patients. To be honest, it's not all about the money. It's a good point that
No.
you point that out, right? I mean, the majority of us are doing this to help patients, and I'm not saying that as a scripted manner because, to be honest, if it was just for the money, I would not freaking do this.
No,
I'll
you
tell you
should
this.
like go into finance or something.
Yeah, go into finance or doing something that doesn't take like, I mean, a good part of our 20s, right? I mean, some of our
Yeah.
early 30s, right? I mean, we don't talk about this enough, but the FOMO part of being in the medical field, right? I mean, I've seen countless of my friends travel the world, right? They've been in the workforce for 6+ years. They're, making a killing, having fun. And of course, you kind of feel that, oh, I've missed out on some important points of, traveling with my friends and things like that. But yeah,
Hmm.
that's why I say, if it was just for the money, this is not this is not the route that you would
Yeah.
typically take, right? And so
Totally. Yeah.
definitely it's an honor to kind of take care of patients, and kind of be that person that, the respectable person that can, help people that are in need that can't help themselves and things like that, of course. And of course, we're talking about the resident pay as an isolated thing, but of course, it's not an isolated thing, like you
Right.
said.
Right. Yeah.
So, last couple questions here. If you were to go back, would you still do medicine?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a great question. I think the only reason why I struggle to say no, like I wouldn't do it again, is because like if I hadn't gotten this far, I think I would always be like, oh, maybe I could do it or maybe I should do it, right? So there's this
Yeah,
sense of like, what if I had done it?
yeah, for sure.
And and you're not gonna and you're not gonna feel that if you actually do it.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
for sure.
remember when I was a new nurse and I was like, I was feeling like, oh, like I'm making an impact on my patients, but I'm not really, I feel like there's more that I can do and more that I can learn. And then at that point, I was kind of like, maybe I can be a doctor. Like maybe I'm smart enough, I don't know.
Yeah,
And there's that sense of like, what if I can do this? And I don't think that feeling would have ever gone away had I chosen not to pursue this path. And now that I've pursued this path, I see all these other problems and I'm like, ooh, would I do it again? I don't know.
yeah, yeah. I
But
got you.
yeah, I think I still would do it again. And I hope that like as I continue down this path, I can be a mentor for women or like non-traditional students that choose to find a career in medicine. Like, I think there's a way to do it and still like maintain your sanity.
Yeah.
And I think that there are changes being made. So like good changes being made.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah, I mean, I think I would do it again.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I
And
think,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, and I think, one of the most valuable things that I've gained in medical school is like feeling confident about thinking critically, and then realizing that everything is a lot more nuanced than you think it is, right? Like
Yeah.
there's always like medicine is so complex and there's no right or wrong a lot of the time.
Yeah,
And
yeah, for sure.
yeah, and I think like that realization is such a powerful one that I would not have had I not taken this like long, hard path.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
that's a good point that you make, that there's a lot of nuances in medicine. And
Yeah.
that's why, we call it the healing arts, right? It's a weird, you don't really understand that until you go through medicine, right? You think that, especially if you're on the outside, right, looking in, that
Mhm.
it's a bunch of memorization, right? We're just like walking Wikipedias in a sense that is true, right? That we have
Yeah.
all this medical knowledge, this basic science knowledge, we learn the diseases, the pathology, all this stuff, right? But
Mhm.
really, when it comes to taking care of a patient, right?
Mhm.
Even things that are very, very simple, right? There are nuances in care, which is why, if once you start kind of your training, you start to understand that, that's why we call it management, right? That's not why we say, oh, how do what is the answer to solve for this patient, right? No, it's like,
Mhm.
how do you manage someone? Because yeah, there's an art into it. So there's a little bit of, it's not really right or wrong. It's just, in this situation, what is the best thing we can do, right?
Yeah.
In a
Yeah.
different situation that's slightly different, it could be completely different, right? And so, yeah,
Mhm.
there are a lot of nuances to it, but
Mhm.
I just wanted to mention, I mean, your answer is great in the fact that, talking about whether or not you want to do medicine, you know, people might look on the outside as like, oh, why is she thinking about it? Shouldn't it be a fast yes or anything like that? And I
Yeah.
think that the majority of us would agree that, I mean, I always joke about it, right? I always joke to the first year medical
Mhm.
students, like, oh, you still have a chance out. You're not too far in, right? As a
That
joke,
would have been
right?
a good time to get
Yeah,
out.
exactly,
Yeah.
right. And so, the reason why is because, for all the good things, the pure things of medicine, right? Taking care of people, right? Really being by someone and really kind of caring, right? Which is the most
Mhm.
of us of why we got into healthcare to begin with, right? That usually stays pretty pure, right? But it
Mhm.
goes with all the other things that they don't, you don't see until you start medicine, right? How's the
Mhm.
system, right? It's like, oh, well, why am I seeing a patient that, has advanced cancer because he doesn't have access to healthcare, right? All these things
Mhm.
that are, a bigger issue than just taking care of a patient. And obviously the
Mhm.
things that come with that, and the long hours, the sacrifices of not seeing friends and family, all these things, um, me personally, I would definitely do it again, but there is a little hesitation where it's like, I wouldn't want to paint kind of a perfect picture of like, oh, this is the best
Mhm.
thing in the world that for anyone
Right.
and anyone, right? And so definitely, for sure, I think your
Yeah.
answer and kind of how you were thinking about the pros and the cons. I think as you get
Mm.
more and more into your training, it's kind of that thought
Yeah.
process when this question comes along, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing about like med influencers on Instagram sometimes that like make it seem like their life is so perfect because they're in medicine and like look at all the great things that I'm doing and oh and this is my latte that I get at the coffee shop
Yeah,
every morning. And it's like you don't have time to go to a coffee shop in the morning. Like they're
for
all
sure.
closed. They're all
For
closed.
sure. For sure.
Yeah.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up. And that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, and kind of, for not only, medical students that are looking up, or, residents to see kind of what other residents are doing, or pre-meds looking in, because, I think that, like some parts of medicine that we talked about, the education standpoint, it's good to know exactly really kind of what happens, not the rosy, oh yeah, like you go in, right, you have all this prestige, you get your, latte at the coffee shop, right, you take a snappy of you studying. No, 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 there is
Yeah.
no, I'm not taking a picture of when I'm studying because I look like crap, right? Like, I'm not putting that out in the world, right? And so
Yeah.
definitely, for
Yeah.
sure, it's a very different image of what medicine really is. Super worth it,
Mhm.
of course, to take care of patients and to have that honor, but definitely, it's not all positives, that's for sure.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, last question for you to kind of wrap this up. What kind of advice would you give to, younger medical students, since you're finishing up, going into anesthesia? If you were to take, one piece of advice that you feel strongly about, what would you give?
Hmm. Um, I think that I have recognized the importance of having mentors in medicine. And I would say
Yeah.
to seek out a mentor early on, like as early as possible, even if you're not a medical student yet, like even if you're not even a pre-med student yet, like maybe you're a high school student or maybe you're even a middle school student, like I don't know, like whenever you realize that you might be interested in medicine, I think it's really important to seek out a mentor. And I think that's difficult sometimes. Like I didn't really understand the concept of a mentor until like after I started medical school.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's hard to find someone that's going to invest in you sometimes. And so you have to have some thick skin. Like, you're not going to just like find the perfect mentor quickly or
Yeah.
easily. Like, sometimes that takes work and time to find a mentor that's going to invest in you. Um, and then I think just, seeking out those experiences early on, whether it's like shadowing in a hospital or maybe so like I thought I might be interested in anesthesia. And so during my first year of medical school, I reached out to an anesthesiologist who ended up being my mentor. And he's like absolutely incredible. I don't think I would be here today had I not met him. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like we were talking about earlier, like lots of medicine is like self-directed learning
Yeah,
and
for
self-directed
sure.
experiences. So again, like finding a mentor is like a self-directed thing. You have to do it. It's going to make your life a lot better if you have one. And I think as you progress throughout this training, it's also important to be a mentor to someone that's maybe um not quite where you are yet. So, find a mentor, be a mentor. I think that
Yeah.
would be my advice.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with you that finding a mentor is going to make your life so much easier in the fact that it's someone that has already gone through what you're going to go through or you're wanting to go through, right? And of course, um, just like anything else, right? With any kind of other relationship, finding a mentor is going to be the same, right? It's kind of whatever you put in is going to what you get out, right?
Mhm.
Me being on
Mhm.
the side of being mentors to a lot of medical students, I would say that I'm more receptive personally. And, as you go, become a resident, you're going to probably feel the same, Mickey, but you're going to feel more receptive towards wanting to mentor somebody,
Mhm.
right? If they are putting an effort of, hey, like, trying to reach out, trying to shadow you, trying to get your
Mhm.
perspective on things, right? Because
Right,
obviously,
right.
as a resident, right, we don't have plenty of time. We would love to teach and mentor tons of people, but if we are the one doing most of the talking, or we're the ones reaching out, or we're the ones, if it's a one directional thing, just like any relationship, that's going to
Mhm.
fizz out pretty quickly, right? And so,
Yeah.
definitely for sure, going out and don't be shy, I would say, is a good one too, in the fact of finding a mentor,
Mhm.
because yeah,
Mhm.
sometimes it's just that awkward, hey, I'm
Yeah.
Daniel, I'm a first year medical student, I don't know
Yeah.
too much about ENT, but I would love to learn. Even that awkward
Mhm.
conversation, you'd be
Mhm.
surprised that most attendings are very nice. Same with residents,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
we've all been there, right? That kind of awkward,
Totally.
intimidated,
Yeah.
nervous
Mhm.
standpoint. But yeah, finding a mentor, super
Yeah.
great advice for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
that's a great advice, for
And
sure.
and
Yeah.
like I will say I'm sure it's the case with ENT too, like, I don't know. But, I just remember, like, doing my first elective, like, it was like a 2-week elective rotation in anesthesia, and everyone was like and this is, like, goes beyond mentors, but everyone that I worked with was, like, so enthusiastic to have me on the other side of the curtain, and they were just like, "Oh, come on in, like, come into my little bubble, like, do you wanna intubate? Like, do you wanna start this IV?" And they were just, like, so excited about having me do things. And I think that really kind of shaped my experience
Yeah, for
in
sure.
anesthesia. And like, it made me want to also be that person in the future, Just so, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's important to realize that those experiences do make a big impact on people that haven't made the decision about what specialty they're going
Yeah.
into yet. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Piggying back on that, I mean, I think I've talked to you about this, but you end up, to be honest, choosing your specialty based off the people you meet. I
Mhm.
truly,
Mhm.
honestly believe that. I think that when you go to medical school, especially if you're somebody who's just wanting to help patients, right? You can help patients in any of these specialties, right? We're
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
physicians at the end of the day, but your
Yeah.
experience with, certain physicians, right? That kind of, you click with them, or, they've given you advice, life advice, or, things like that, or, just acknowledging you, just the fact of them acknowledging you, right? Those
Mhm.
things kind of shape, you're like, oh, I like anesthesia because my mentor is X, right? And that's, to be honest, that's
Yeah.
kind of how I chose ENT is, I met with one of my mentors, and super nice guy.
Mhm.
Ironically, his name is also Dr. Wynn, right? So yes, my
Oh,
same,
yeah, you did tell me
yeah,
that. Yeah,
no
yeah,
relation
yeah.
whatsoever, but
Yeah.
my original mentor, amazing guy. He runs marathons, head and neck surgeon, has a great family, practically has it all, right? And oh, he's a colonel
Mhm.
in the army, right? So I was just like, what the heck, right? And so,
Yeah.
it's kind of the people that you meet and kind of shape not only kind of what specialty you want to be in, but kind of who you are as a person. So definitely for sure, mentors can make that kind of change in your direction or your trajectory as a medical student, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Mickey, thanks for kind of being on this podcast, and I'm sure that we'll have many podcasts in the future. And
Yeah. This was so fun. Thanks for having me on
yeah,
here.
for sure. It was
Yeah.
a pleasure. It was super fun. Super casual, of course, but I think that, we've talked on, topics that, we don't really talk too much in medicine because everyone's, hustling, bustling, doing their own thing and kind of bottling it up, right? I
Yeah.
think, I'm definitely, I do that plenty of times, right? Because, there's this image of, I think in medicine, that you're quote unquote weak if you talk about the stresses, the struggles, etc. Right? But we're just like everyone else, right? I don't think people in medicine are any different than the struggles that other people have not in medicine. So
Mhm.
definitely for sure, thanks for coming on, and hopefully we get to do this again soon.
Sounds good.
All right,
Good
I'll
to see
catch you
you,
later.
Daniel. Bye.
Bye.